Welcome back, fellow adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today I'm thrilled to chat with Jason Bulmahn, the Director of Games at Paizo Inc. and a renowned game design consultant. Obviously, Jason has a wealth of experience in tabletop role-playing game design, and he's moving into board games. And today we're going to dive deep into the fascinating world of narrative design across different game formats. From Pathfinder's epic role-playing adventures to the new Pathfinder Quest board game, we'll explore how narrative strategies vary and what insights can be gleaned for design across all game mediums. Jason, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I am super excited to sit down with the Director of Games at Paizo Inc. That's a big deal. Big news. Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a bit of a new title for me. I was a Director of Game Design for a long time. That meant that I was in charge of kind of the rules and lore team at Paizo, the people who make the kind of Pathfinder rule books and the Pathfinder Lost Omens.
Right on.
But now I'm just responsible for making new games. My entire job is just make new games. What kind of games? You tell us. It's kind of a rare and privileged kind of job in this industry to be able to be just like, show us what you got. And I'm working with a very talented designer, my lead designer for Paizo Games, which is Joe Pacini. And the two of us are just dreaming up new games to kind of make and show the world. So we're excited to do it.
You live in the dream, man.
It's not bad. I got my start a long time ago, and I used to be an architect. Not capital A architect. I wasn't licensed. I was working towards my license, but I had a degree and was working at a firm. And then, one day through circumstance, I happened to get a job offer working for Dragon Magazine. And I'd been a gamer for a long time at this point, right? And I've been going to Gen Con and volunteering and doing freelance work and stuff, right? I wasn't just a newbie. But yeah, I got a job offer to work on Dragon Magazine, and I was in Seattle 3 weeks later, sitting down at my desk as the managing editor of Dragon. So, making games for a living as my full-time gig is something I've been doing for almost 20 years now, and I'm damn lucky to.
I like, at the beginning, I like to ask, what's your origin story? How did you fall in love with gaming and writing? How you kind of already hit on the high points there, but when did you start gaming?
I started gaming when I was 10. I was a kid in, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a friend of mine in middle school got the original Mensa Red Box and dragged me through it. And I was unsure at first, but after I lost my first character to a yellow mold-covered dinner plate, I was hooked. I went to my first Gen Con the year after that when I was 11. My dad dropped me off at that show with my friend by ourselves and was like, I'll see you at 6. And we just got to go in. And we were kids at the time, but, we were precocious, 11, maybe 12-year-olds, depending on the time of year. I think it might have been 12. But, just wandered, looked at games. I played one game. I was only there one day. I played one game. It was a diorama miniature game. And I was hooked. I knew that was a thing I wanted to play forever. And I played it through high school. I played it through college. I eventually got a job in architecture. I started playing lots of games, right? I immediately kind of fell in love with the hobby. Played Vampire, played MechWarrior, Battlelords of the 23rd Century, played the really old Aliens game, played all the Vampire, Werewolf, kind of World of Darkness stuff. But he just kind of wandered all over the place with Play Curves. I just fell in love with gaming as a whole, as a hobby. But in the back of my head, I never really considered making it my job at that. I went to an art high school, and I was like, I want to be a comic book artist. And then I was like, I'm not good enough. And then I went to college and was like, I'm going to be an engineer because I did like math. And I was like, oh, that's too much math. And then I landed in the middle, which was kind of a blend of art and math, which is architecture. And I really loved it. And I started doing that. And at the same time, I started doing a lot of volunteering for the RPGA. I got out of my Magic the Gathering phase and went back to role playing games, and I volunteered for the RPG and started writing for them and started running the Living Greyhawk campaign. And at that time, it was being administered by Eric Mona, who would, 6 months later be spun off from Wizards of the Coast to form a new company called Paizo to publish Dragon and Dungeon magazines. And, but I kept working for the RPGA until 2004, when I applied for a job at Wizards. I got a flight out there. I got interviewed in person. I got a tour of their offices. I was in the running, and I got second place. And but at the same time, it was a hiring wave, and they hired away some folks from Paizo that they had sent to Paizo. A couple of them came back, leaving some openings. And Eric, who had already worked with in Living Greyhawk, knew that I was this close to getting the job at Wizards, and was like, well, if your bona fides are good enough for them, you're good enough for us. So to kind of skip a lengthy hiring process, they just offered me the job. And I took it, and I was the managing editor of Dragon from 2004 through its print end in 2007. And then, from there, I was working on the Game Mastery line of products at Paizo, while we had one team creating the Pathfinder Adventure Path, which started with like Rise of the Rune Lords. And I was responsible for making like adventures and maps and other stuff. And it was fine work. But I wanted more. And another job opening came open at Wizards of the Coast. And I got invited, like, from higher ups to apply for the job. Like, they're basically pulling out the chair saying, you want this job. And I was like, okay, I'm not fully satisfied with what I'm doing here. And I, went and applied for that job. And it came down to me and one other candidate. And then they gave it to the other guy again.
Oh, no.
Oh, man. And I went home that day. And I was just kind of frustrated, and these things happen. But I was so looking forward to being able to make, role-playing games. Paizo at that time was making adventures and stuff like that, but it was all for 3.5, and we were starting to learn about what 4th edition might be. And we hadn't quite heard any warning signs yet, but, there was some trouble that we were hearing from the playtesters. And I went home that night and was like, you know what? I'm going to at least do something great. They're about to abandon 3.5 for 4E. I'm going to write a hack of 3.5, making it better. And I started a document that night called 3.75. And 4 months later, Paizo would be like, okay, what are we doing? We haven't seen 4th edition. We don't know what the license looks like. And I was like, we could publish this. That was the day I became the lead designer of Pathfinder. So, that's the sort of tale. I mean, there's lots of additional twists and turns, but, that's how I kind of got to where I am. And now I make whatever game I feel like. So, Pizza Finder is coming out next year. It's going to be great.
I'm going to hold you to that. I like my pizza.
It's real easy. You just call up your favorite pizza joint and have it delivered. If it shows up, you win. It's
I won. Just one last night. That's really cool. That's an incredible story, man. That's wild. You keep saying you can make whatever you want, and obviously I don't want to dig behind the curtain, but like, I talk to people from digital games as well as tabletop, as well as, Pick a Path, and like, are you exploring all avenues, or are we still just strictly tabletop board game?
Well, I mean, I have to work with what tools I have, right? And to that end, Paizo is a tabletop pen and paper role-playing game company. Now, that extends pretty nicely into card games and board games. That's pretty much the same medium, right? Instead of a book, it's a box. We already have experience doing like beginner boxes and stuff like that. And we've done some board games. Although most of those have been designed out of house. When it comes to medium, if it's something that goes on the table and you roll dice with it, or you play cards with it, I think that's within the realm of possibility. Digital games are something we don't quite have the staff for. I'd love to be able to make digital games and digital tools for our games. Like, I wish I had the ability to and the staff to make that happen, but we just don't have the staff right at the moment. Kind of a different business.
Yeah,
to some extent. So
I was just curious.
yeah. So we're mostly focusing on board games, card games, miniatures games. Things of that. We can do additional role playing games. So I'm excited to kind of explore the space. I think we had the Pathfinder adventure card game a few years back, and that was pretty popular. We're currently working on Pathfinder Quest, which is an adventure cooperative board game. I'm super excited about that. I think folks are really going to dig it. But we got some other things in the hopper as well, including a couple other games that are in flight now, that are being worked on, that have deadlines, any of which are coming up. And I'm just excited to get more games out there. I think, and some of them can be tied directly to our worlds, right? They could be tied to Starfinder. They could be tied to Pathfinder. But some of them could be whatever we want them to be, right? They could be new things. And I do think that we've got a lot of skill on staff that can do some pretty amazing stuff. And right now I'm just trying to harvest all of that and make as many things as I can as quickly as I can. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we are here today to talk about the differences and the similarities between tabletop and board game, specifically around narrative tools and such. But before we dig into the meaty stuff, something popped into my head. I got to ask. Following the Gen Con announcements and the talk about the fiction line coming back, do you have thoughts? Because I'm so excited to see Galarian fiction coming. Like, that's huge for me personally. So what are your thoughts?
I think, everybody on set, I can't speak too much to it because I'm not directly involved with that part of the business. I do know that folks on staff are super excited to have fiction. We had a pretty good fiction line there for a little while. That kind of petered out as we were trying to figure out how to take it in the future. And I think the one thing that we were missing last time, to some extent, was really kind of making them an event, making them something kind of special. That doesn't mean that the books were bad or anything like that. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on our past work. There's some great books back there. But there's a difference between those and, say, God's Reign, which is tied to RPG book and changing our story and lore and has momentum and kind of has more weight behind the punch, right? It means something. It's important to our world and the stories that we're telling. And I just think that's exciting. And they all won't come with dead gods, but I think that the goal is to make them have a bit more meaning, have a bit more weight. They're another story that's happening in the world. Mm-hmm. That kind of gives your story some context. So I'm excited to see where they take it. I don't know all their plans, to be honest. I sit in on some of the meetings, and I'm like, okay, cool. Go do that. I gotta go make games. That'll be over here. So yeah, a whole lot of it.
Very cool. I was just curious what your take was. Not looking for behind the scenes stuff.
I'm excited. I haven't read God's Reign yet, so I know the gist of what happens. I know the plot and the story because we had to plan a whole bunch of stuff. But I haven't read the novel yet. I haven't had a chance. Cool. Good effort.
All right. Well, let's dig into this. So, you have obviously extensive experience with tabletop role-playing, game design, working on board games as well. Let's start broad. What are the big differences and similarities between the two spaces working? How do they differ in storytelling, perhaps? Some of the key considerations when working between the two spaces.
I think one of the biggest things is just there is a structural difference between the way that the narrative and play can express itself between the two genres, or the two media. I think in a role-playing game, you can kind of tell whatever story you want. You are bound by the rules that the game sets down for you, but within that, you're free to kind of freewheel and change the direction of the story. If you've got a GM that can really kind of roll with the punches, you can decide not to go on the adventure they had planned. You can instead be like, yeah, we're going to stay in town this week, and I'm really interested in talking to the dog that's in that tavern that can speak common. We're going to find what his deal is, and he's got an adventure for us. Great. I think you can just kind of ad-lib and go in different directions. I think when you're building a narrative for a board game, it is like, this is the narrative. There is no other narrative. You cannot go do a different thing. I think there are ways you can play in that thing. I also think that makes it inherently more accessible to kind of newer players and folks who have less experience. I think role-playing games can be, they're very engaging, they're very freeing, they're ways to explore ideas and feelings and concepts and things that you maybe haven't thought of before. But for people who are new, that can be very intimidating. I think there is kind of a threshold you have to cross through when you realize you're not just playing a game, you're actually telling a story and you're part of that narrative. Yeah. I think board games kind of typically live on the other side of that, where you don't necessarily see people going whole hog into their characters at a board game. They're more interested in the story. They want to see how it develops. If there is a narrative, sometimes the narrative is far more abstract. Hey, congrats, you're all making wine. Mm-hmm. Story there is we all made wine, and who made wine the best? That's the story. Yeah. It's less about, I am this specific character. But in those games that do have that, I do think that even within that, you're just in a more constrained environment. The story can only go in certain directions. That is what it's going to be. There isn't a lot of uncertainty. And oftentimes, there's also not even someone to adjudicate uncertainty, right? You don't have someone playing arbiter or narrator. Right. So, I mean, at its heart, I think they both offer some advantage. And they both come with some drawbacks, right? It's all about picking your medium, right? Mm-hmm. I think role-playing games kind of give you ultimate freedom, but ultimate freedom comes at the price of having to know a lot and being able to kind of ad-lib and adjust and storytell in real time. And that is a developed skill. Whereas board games don't have that level of flexibility, and as such do not come with as heavy of a kind of cognitive load for all of the players. I mean, they can certainly have a heavy cognitive load. That's certainly it's a complicated board game. But on a narrative side, they're usually a bit more straightforward. But that does also enable you to tell some pretty dynamic stories. Or set up a big reveal that then pays off guaranteed, because it's the only thing that can happen. Right. I think that's what the biggest difference just comes down to the fact that the mediums allow for different avenues of storytelling that the other one isn't really well suited.
I suppose perhaps a better question might be then, what are some of the similarities that we can learn or pick from them as a writer or a designer? What is something you learned from making tabletop that you apply to board games or vice versa?
I think, coming from a primarily kind of role-playing game story development kind of mindset means that I'm always looking for ways to make sure that the story is expressed by the game's mechanics, that where I can, I make their choices matter and I make them important. I give opportunities for people to immerse themselves in their character and their idea if they want to. Mm-hmm. I think looking at it from that angle, like the Quest has been an interesting experience. So we started with Elemental Stones. That was kind of the first game we did internally all ourselves. And Elemental Stones is an abstract tile placing. The narrative is you are all elemental lords and you're trying to control this elemental node by influencing it with your power. And that's the story. It's a struggle kind of thing. That's the limit of the narrative. There isn't cards that reveal twists and turns. There's nothing like that. It's just playing patterns, and it's a tile pattern matching. So that's about as far away from a role-playing game as possible, because your characters don't even really have description. They're just, I'm the Fire Lord. Okay. Yeah. Or the Fire Emissary. But when it came to Quest, we were like, okay, we want something that's more like a middle ground. It has some elements where you get to make choices. You get to build your own kind of widget character, made out of a number of cards and pieces and stuff like that. And that's the character you decided to make. So you have agency. And then at the same time, the game itself is about a story. It has a large form, complex narrative that each adventure is a part of. After several of the adventures, you have choices to make that might determine what adventure you play next. Within those adventures, there are things that you can do that are called challenges. So it's not just fighting, not just a fighting game. Right. There are exploration challenges and combat challenges. Combat challenges are, in addition to the monsters you are fighting, you could I'm going to roll this barrel of oil down at the monsters, and I have to make a check, and if I do it right, something cool might happen. I don't know what that cool thing is because all challenges are resolved in a separate book. So there's the adventure book that kind of lays out, here's what the adventure is. And then throughout that adventure, there are these combat challenges, and then there's exploration challenges. And those are ways that you can affect the world of the story by making checks or making decisions, and then it tells you after you've made the decision to go to the challenge book to see what the result is. So in a way, the narrative unfolds over time. And some of those choices will get you to write something down in called the adventure record. And the adventure record might contain things like saved the town dog, helped the mayor find his flowers, right? Whatever it may be. And later on in the adventure, in an entirely different adventure, it might say, well, did you save the town dog? Well, he's here. And he helps you locate the person who's in the wreckage of this burnt out building because the dog can sniff them. And as a result, you get a bonus on this check, right? So it's not the same as having kind of a free-form narrative where you can do whatever you want. But I think our sensibilities about how to build story and how to give characters choice and agency and some decision-making, other than just what monster do they attack, I think is important to them. And I think it's something we want to see fully kind of explored in the game. So I'm excited for it. I think lessons like that are things I'm looking to explore in the future. Now, obviously, we're going to be making other games where it's like, yep, this is just a gambling card game, and is it fantasy themed or science fiction themed? Sure. But, it's all about knowing what medium, what weight of game you're shooting for, how much narrative you can actually apply to it.
It's important that you recognize that scale, because I should have mentioned as well that we're talking more about narrative games here. Because, yeah, you're right. There's games like Viticulture and Santorini and such where it's really just about the design. It's about creating an interesting, fun space to play with the mechanics, as opposed to Pathfinder card game where there was stories, or Dead of Winter with lots of story built into it. And there's a scale in between, obviously. What are your thoughts on the emergent story play that can happen, or emergent narrative that can happen during gameplay? So you have a game that is more design-based, not a lot of built-in narrative, maybe some lore and some setting, but the story that evolves out of the interactions in the gameplay and the story that happens there. How do we do that?
I'm always interested in games that can kind of enable that sort of play. I think the times where I most see it happen is when people are playing some random 4X game and they decide to play up the role of whatever species, emperor, leader that they're playing, and all of a sudden their decisions aren't necessarily what's best in the game. Their decisions are what would make the most sense for, I'm playing Nero, right? And I'm running Rome, and I'm dealing with the other cultures at the time. We're playing a 4X expand and conquer the world kind of game. And, everybody's making decisions based on that, right? Or talking in character or voice. And then all of a sudden it becomes a story game, even though it's frankly about as, abstract of a game as you get. Moving tokens around and conquering regions and collecting wheat tokens, right? It's not a lot of story bolted onto that. But yeah, I think, some of those are really kind of fun. I think again, this comes back to the fact that the game can, in its design, can allow for that and kind of enable that without pushing it. But you can also go so far as to not have that enabled at all, right? If you're playing, a relatively straightforward card game, you're playing Sushi Go or Hanabi.
Yeah.
There's no characterization, right? You are just playing the game. You are, titularly like, you're someone making a fireworks show, or you're someone, eating sushi. And that's it. That's the story. There's never any role playing with that. There's never any kind of role assumption. And again, it comes down to, does the game make that matter? Like, because here's the thing, in Elemental Stones, I would say that we don't do that. The role that you have matters in that it is a scoring metric at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But there's literally almost no other characterization or even explanation what these characters are about, because it's frankly an abstract strategy. It's a tile placement pattern matching. And as a result, there really isn't much there to graft onto. I think the game needs to cross kind of into having roles or some sort of characterization that the players can empathize. Because without that, you really don't have anything. Now, take social game. We're just playing werewolf, and everyone's a villager. Yeah, well, one of you is the mayor, though, and one of you is the werewolf, and one of you is this, and one of you is that, and you generally don't want to let on who you really are, but some of the roles you do, and depending on what version you're playing, and as a result, it ends up being this thing where, like, the entire point is that you have a characterization and you've created this character. And I have played this with some of my fellow game designers and game design folks, at conventions before, and had just a wild time because everybody understands the assignment. And sometimes people will make up a character that's like, I'm just a normal villager, but I'm going to be a bastard to all of you. And then you're going to hang me because, frankly, I have to be out of here in an hour anyway. So, you're gonna light me on fire, do whatever bad thing, that's fine. But I gotta get out of here anyway. So I'm gonna double bluff myself into getting eliminated. And people will ham it up and make it into a thing. But the game is, it couldn't be more simple. Everybody has a role. You talk about it. You vote one person to kick off. You're trying to kick off all the werewolves. That's it. Oh, and then between each round, the werewolves can eat somebody. So the pool is constantly reducing. That's the basics of the game. There's some other complexities to it, but, there's not a lot of there for the game to push, but the game does so by its nature, kind of creating space for you to do, kind of improv acting.
Yep.
But, again, I think a lot of this just comes down to intentionality, right? Understanding what type of game you're trying to make, what type of experience you want at the table. If I'm trying to make kind of I'm trying to make a calm, cerebral strategy game that is, a 2-player, it's chess but not chess. I don't want characterization. I don't want any in it because that would detract from what I want to be kind of a typical cerebral experience. Whereas a light, fun social party game, if I don't have characterization, if I don't have fun and laughs at the table, if we don't have that kind of frenetic energy, it's not really living up to its potential. As a matter of fact, it probably won't get played very.
Excellent point. In the narrative design world, we call it the player fantasy. Identifying what the player's fantasy is, and then make sure you respect it throughout the whole design, and that includes the narrative design.
Yeah, the interplay of rules and narrative has always kind of fascinated me because at its heart, most games are big, are big mathematical formulas that equate to fun, and you're basically trying to figure out how to make the game express and create the play state that you want, that is the thing you're imagining and is the fun that you think it's going to be. And how those two interplay with each other has long been a kind of fascination. In role-playing games, it's very evident, right? Because you're building a mathematical formula that kind of expresses the reality of the game in a way that is directly correlated to player action. the more you get kind of further away from that, the more that becomes more of an abstract. And making sure that that's an important part is you can see games that miss it, right? Where it's just kind of a bolt-on thing, or it's forgotten. And for some, that's appropriate. That's the right thing to do because it's not that kind of game. I don't need all the characters of the vendor. That's fine. Just
You touched on the concept of constraints. Constraints is an important part of any game design in any of the mediums. And I quite often hear designers saying, you know, constraints are a good thing. Constraints drive creativity. Constraints force you to think in new ways. I'm curious, what are the constraints? And again, you've touched on this already somewhat, but let's dig a little deeper. The constraints of board games versus that tabletop space. How does the fences change?
Well, I think in board games, those constraints are usually pretty rigid. Whereas in a role-playing game, those constraints come with penalties. It doesn't mean you can't cross them, but you probably don't want to. I think in board games, it's like, yeah, this is the things you can do. You know, in a role-playing game, it would be the difference between being in a dungeon and being in a free-form city, right? In a dungeon, you're basically on a circuit diagram. You have choices of where to go. Yes, no. Do I go that way? Do I go this way? Do I go to this? No. Do I go to that? And in that, you're kind of on rails. You don't have infinite flexibility in how you approach problems. It's pretty much go open up that door, see what's on the other side, and deal with it. But if you're doing like a long form, I'm doing an investigation in town. There's 14 NPCs we could talk to. You could invent other things you could go do. There aren't really constraints on player choice and player activity. Now, I do think that separating that's the narrative choices the player can make. I think that's different than the mechanical and the frankly, the game's combat engine and things like that do have, in a role-playing game, do have more strict kind of guidelines just in terms of like, well, you can't just throw an entire city at someone. You're not that powerful, right? The constraint is you are this character with these abilities. In in board games, I feel like all of that stuff is more tightly controlled and has to be to some extent because again, the lack of having kind of an overarching narrator or someone who is there to kind of make sure that the game is being hedged, is usually absent in a board game. So as a result, you have to make sure everyone's playing fairly. And by accordance of the rules. So those guidelines have to be strict, right? Yeah. It's your turn in the board game. You get to do 2 things. That's it. You can't say, well, I've decided I'm going to do 3 things because I tried real hard this morning. No, that's not how the game doesn't allow for that. So yeah, I mean, ultimately that's just a difference of medium.
Yeah. Well, as a designer, though, I'm curious, as somebody who worked so intensively on Pathfinder, as a designer, what can you do when you're building an engine or adding onto an engine? I'm not talking writing adventures or modules or creating new magic items. I'm talking like actual core engine, like the skill checks and action economy. How does that impact the ability to create narratives? Like, is that ever a consideration when you're sitting down as a designer going, okay, what kind of action economy am I going to set here? How does it affect story?
Yes, I think it's actually a huge component of it. I think we usually approach it from the other end, though.
Well,
we usually start by, at least my approach, is to say, ignore the rules because we don't have them. What environment do we want to create? Okay, so we want to tell a story in which heroes start from humble beginning and have to struggle and face certain death against overwhelmingly powerful foes at first, having to use guile and luck to win the day. Eventually, they leave that early phase and they enter a part of the story where they are competent heroes. People start turning to them for aid. They start building a name for themselves. Their story, their legend grows. And as they progress into that, they become powerful, world-renowned heroes whose abilities allow them to challenge the gods themselves. And within that, we're going to tell these stories where the characters are going on adventures, they're exploring things, they're, learning things, they're making enemies, they're making allies. We're having combats that have to flow logically. We know throughout combat, we want characters to have moments to shine. We want to make sure we're passing action and focus back and forth between the characters so everybody feels like they're contributing, because it is a cooperative game, and we don't want folks to be able to hog the limelight. So how do we make sure that it's balanced so that everybody has a role to play and an action to fulfill? And we're taking all of these things together and we're saying, okay, what does that mean for the game's math?
Yeah.
What does that mean for the way characters act? What does that mean for how you build a character and how you advance? Right? So just taking, for example, the story, that narrative arc of like starting from humble beginnings, becoming established, growing in power, becoming a legendary hero, and becoming incredibly powerful. That expresses itself very specifically in a math formula that has a slight S-shaped curve. And it does. And what it does is it says you face scaling difficulties at low levels that are kind of pretty steep. And then you level out. We want that mid-game to be kind of solid and long. We want that mid-game to feel like you are still incrementally improving, but you are still struggling, but you're out of that early stage where you desperately need good luck to win the day. You can rely a little bit more on your own ability, because your abilities are starting to overtake the swinginess of the D20 roll. So in other words, your bonuses are now stacked up in a way that the D20's influence is shrinking on your choices. Because at early levels, it far outweighs. And then we get to high level, where the D20 roll only becomes well, did I accidentally screw this up, or did I do it really well? I can now crush both. The relationship of my bonuses to my target numbers has changed and flipped, and now I'm in supremacy. I am the one who's dictating the narrative. And that's a math formula that equates and spells itself out as a narrative. And you can take that the next step further, right? You break that down into saying, okay, well, how do we want the characters to influence each other and play against each other? Okay, well, we need to make sure the characters have well-defined roles, and we need to know what those roles do and make sure that they're not stepping on each other. We also need to make sure that the combats and fights, the backside of the engine, the adversaries and challenges, speak to the various character abilities and give them various chances to show off their stuff. Yeah, you're going to face monsters whose sole purpose is to be kind of low-level chaff for the powerful wizard to blow off the board with one spell, or the fighter to go way, just cleaving through, chopping them down with one hit, right? You're going to face more powerful foes that everybody has to use teamwork and tactics to beat. They need to flank. They need to get their spells on it. They need to, get themselves in a favorable environment. They need to take away its support minion, right? We want there to be tactical, important choices all throughout this, and we don't want any character to have the perfect tool set to face all problems.
Right.
But we want them all to have tools that work some of the time against certain, right? And that means that the players are kind of tossing focus back and forth, because they'll run into a fight that's like, oh, it's undead. Cleric, you want to take care of this? Great.
Right.
We're good. We need to get across this giant chasm. Hey, wizard, you got a fly spell for us? We can make this work, right? And it's through that, combined with math and a million other, factors in the game, the way that we do kind of 4 degrees of success and how that plays into kind of narrative flow, how proficiencies play out over time and help the narrative arc smooth to what we want it to. It's a giant, complex math formula that turns into a story, but we don't want you to focus on the math. So we, at the same time, build handles that are super simple to understand. Proficiency is always your level plus a stat plus 2, 4, 6, or 8, depending on what you're. That's it. And you roll a d20 and add that number. That's the core engine of the game. Did you beat the target number? You did it. Did you beat it by 10? You critically did it. That's it. That's the game. And you can explain that to someone like that. But what they're not seeing is how we balance the monsters on the back end in relation to that formula, how we change the treasure distribution system to make sure that it gave you bonuses at the right spot to kind of make your characters grow into legendary heroes, all of that stuff is hidden behind dragons and +1 swords and, you know, potions and all sorts of cool stuff and a mountain of monsters you can fight. But I mean, you know, that's why it took me and a pretty brilliant team of 3 other folks 3 years to make that game. You know, it's hard work. It's something you kind of set down and you try and figure out, and you go down a lot of wrong directions and realize that some elements of it don't work the way you want them to, and then you got to beat them into shape and try again. Right?
Yeah, I love this stuff. I nerd out about the math behind balance, behind story in a game all the time. So I just love hearing it from somebody, you know, who's done it professionally.
I think, you know, sometimes, you know, I can look at a game and disassemble it pretty quickly, and you can tell, you can see when that care is built into it, right? Because you will be like, boy, this does seem to change and alter and swing over time, and different games approach this different, right? And that's part of understanding your narrative. If you look at a game like Call of Cthulhu, this narrative does not exist in this way. The math does not work that way. Combat and hit points and all that kind of stuff is not a focus of that game. As a matter of fact, the entire game is an erosion of what few resources you have while desperately trying to advance your skills enough to succeed. And you are trading things that you cannot get back, sanity and power and other things like that, to gain the tools and abilities necessary to try and beat this thing before you lose your character. And that is a very different mathematical expression that turns into a very different story. Yeah. Right? So you can see those sorts of you know, and you know, I've also played games where it's not there, or where it doesn't quite fire the right way. And, you know, I mean, that doesn't mean those games don't have things to offer. But I think, you know, it's a challenge. It's hard work. You know, and everybody who wants to put on the hat of game designer, right? You know, you can do it, but be prepared to do a lot more math than you ever thought you might need to do.
Hell yeah.
It's a lot of math.
But you nail it when you say that, come at the game from the point of view as a designer of what is the experience? What is the framework here? Because you're right, a survival game where it's, you know, you're racing against darkness or against the elder gods, it's going to have a different mathematical formula. There's going to be a different feeling, a different, like, it's baked into all of the rules. And so Pathfinder is that heroic, like going from simple to heroic. It's beautiful.
I like the math engine of Pathfinder 2 a lot, and I know I'm biased. That's okay. But I think that there's a lot you can do with it, right? A couple years back, I released a hack of Pathfinder 2e called Hellfinder. Hellfinder is a zombie apocalypse hack of Pathfinder 2e. It's set in modern time, or rather a bit in the future, but it's a world that's been overrun by zombies. There's zombies everywhere. And the game is set in Seattle, and it was set in my old neighborhood in Seattle. It uses the same math engine, but characters only go to 5th level. Oof, that's it. You're ordinary humans. You're not superheroes. 5th level is as high as you can get. Yeah. And I tweaked the monster side of the math so that the monsters are a bit more of a problem. You do not have the right tools for them. And on top of it, I added a mechanic for, you know, you can get guns and you can get armor and stuff like that helps you. But all of the tools and stuff that you use can degrade over time. It breaks. You can't rely on the stuff forever. There's durability on stuff. And when you critically fail on attack rolls and stuff, like, your weapons get damaged and can start taking penalties and then stop working.
Yeah.
So the adventures are specifically written to be like, yeah, there's, you know, the adventures are far more loose and freeform. There's an adventure in the book that's about getting a backup power generator from an old fire station. Oof. And how you approach it, how much you take on, what do you do to try and get in there, get it, and find it, and get out without waking up all the zombies in the place and having them chase you around, is a big question. And it's entirely freeform up to you, because the narrative here is, can you get the generator out of the fire station? Right. So I think, again, this is the hack part of it was me just, you know, there are no classes. Instead, you just have, you know, various feats you can take when you level up and stuff like that. You have and it does the thing I love about it the most is that I added a mechanic to it that are called flashback. And when you do a flashback, you pause the game and you're hanging out with the survivors, usually, at a campfire or something, and you're between your next step of your adventure, and you start your flashback back by telling the rest of the players, hey, did I ever tell you the time? And what happens is you then do a one-on-one role-playing session with the narrator about something that happened in your past dictates what you get in the future, because that will then unlock some new feat for you. So you can decide to narratively give yourself a feat throughout play, and you can do that a couple times throughout play, once per session. So, it's about talking about where you were when the parasite dropped. How did you survive? What thing did you do that you don't tell anyone about that you would prefer not to remember? Right? What thing did you witness? It's a dark, different kind of tale. But at its heart, yeah, you can still take a bunch of guns and shoot some zombies. That's fine. It still fits that part of the Pathfinder narrative in terms of a game engine.
Right.
But, you start changing out, I added bruises in addition to hit points, so that when you're wearing armor that protects you, you can still get bruised and eventually get penalties and knocked out by just getting beat up by too many zombies hammering on your armor.
Well, it's a good balance point, yeah.
Yeah, it's my attempt to kind of take the engine and do something different. And again, it's just, approaching from what kind of story do I want to tell and how do I get there.
I like the flashback idea. That's a cool way to use a mechanic to create story, to help your players create moments where they're going to tell lore and background story, which is really cool. I like that.
Well, the start of it, you're intentionally told not to tell the other players your backstory.
Oh.
You're all survivors, and as survivors, you're pretty guarded about who you are and what happened to you. You don't trust these people. And the story that you're trying to tell is how you bond with these strangers in the end of the world and try and keep the lights on for one more day.
I'm going to try it. I'm curious. It's a Pathfinder hack, so obviously it's a hack of a game where you're supposed to be telling a heroic story. Was your goal to create a horror story? Like, were you trying to create a horror game? Because you can have zombie movies and stories that are horror, and you can also have ones that are adventure.
I think this one's more about survival.
Okay.
And I think that touches on horror narratives, and there certainly can be horror moments.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it is a little bit more adventure-y. It's a little bit more like we need to explore this place and find this stuff, and there's going to be zombies. Cool. But I'll tell you, I've run it quite a number of times, and when people start creeping through that fire station and they get to a corridor, and the way ahead is lit, and the way to their right, all the lights have been blown out, and nothing in here works, and it's dark, and they're down to their last battery on their flashlight, and they're like, I don't know, I want to go down there. And, you can see the player doing the calculation and imagining it in their head about what could possibly happen. I ran a special event here back when it was launching for some folks. That was an add-on stretch goal for the crowdfunding campaign for this that sent you to a place called Ridgecrest Mall. And the add-on was a mall brochure, right? It has the map and all the stuff, and it's got a real basic little story in it, but what are you doing at the mall? I don't know. Whatever story you want to tell. So in this story, they were being sent to the mall because the plague hit around Christmas, and they were being sent to the mall to go get gifts. It's 10 years later, and they're being sent to go get gifts for the kids in the settlement.
That's cool.
When Zombie Santa showed up, my players lost. And then they took a chainsaw to him. So it was fun.
Wow. See, that's a story.
Yeah, it was a good time. But, I think, I was kind of trying to push it to that narrative. It's harder to do with some engines than with others. And that's why I had to hack the system. I couldn't run it as is. I had to pull out some parts that I'm like, this doesn't really work. You don't get as many hit points in Hellfinder, right? And the monsters are balanced different. You can use monsters from there, but it tells you to up their reduce their CR a little bit, or their level, to make them the right kind of threat. But, there's not magic, right? You don't have any healing. You have medicine, and you can get things like, first aid kits and aspirin and stuff like that that'll help with bruises or, allow you to do surgery and stuff like that. Should somebody get seriously hurt. But there's no magic way to get a whole bunch of hit points back quick, right? It's like rest, do medicine, take it easy. Good luck. And you don't always have the chance to do that because there's zombies everywhere. So yeah, so that's kind of fun. I'm taking a more straightforward horror hack here in the very near future. Actually, just here this past week, 2 days ago, from when we recorded this. 2 days ago, I released or announced another hack of Pathfinder 2. I'm taking another bite of the apple called Hellfinder. Hellfinder is going to be kind of a different beast. It is a hack of the game. It's going to use a lot of the things you remember. You're still going to roll d20s and add numbers. You're still going to have proficiencies. You're still going to get to take 3 actions on your turn during combat. All the normal stuff is going to be. The proficiency numbers will still work the same. But in Hellfinder, you're playing an agent for a government ministry. That's kind of where they send all of their kind of reject. You're the people who've kind of flunked out of various other government agencies, and now you're put in this kind of cleanup detail. And it has a very specific narrative. It's not a tell whatever story you want. Hellfinder, you can kind of move and do whatever you want. It's set in Seattle. The main story's there, but you could tell. As a matter of fact, it even encourages you. There's open license to be like, yeah, tell me the story about what happened in Paris, right? Tell me the story about what happened in New York during the fall. But Hellfinder doesn't work that way. Hellfinder is set in one town. It's important that you play in that town, because the game itself, the narrative and the rules of the game are revealed over time. At the start of the game, you do not know all the rules or the whole story, if that makes sense.
I'm excited. You've got my interest.
The game comes with all goes according to plan. I'm still writing. It doesn't. This program does not launch until November, November 5th, at exactly 15:25 Central. Pacific. I've crammed so much into this. It's gonna explode under the weight of all of the stuff I put in it. The game is revealed. There are 3 packets of material. When you start your campaign, you're only told to open the first one, and you're not told to open the other ones until you're told. So I'm describing this as a game of mystery and deepening horror. But I got to be honest, I'm being pretty coy with a lot of the details right now. I'm trying to keep a lot of things, up my sleeve, at least right now. There is a page on BackerKit that has a brief trailer, not very long, and 16 seconds or something. And you should go check that page out. There's plenty of stuff hidden away on that page for you to look at. So you can go to BackerKit and go into the coming soon and look for Hellfinder. One word.
I'm going to do that. The link's going to be in the show notes as well, I assure you.
Great. Yeah.
I have so many questions, but I don't want to ruin your surprises.
You can ask them. I'm not going to promise that I'll answer them, but
okay. Well, first of all, when you're designing something like that, when you're like, okay, I'm going to create this experience. Obviously, this feels to me like a legacy game that maybe you can only ever play through once, maybe, possibly. But I'm speculating. You don't have to comment. But what makes you decide, okay, I'm going to build a whole system for this as opposed to just building a 3-book module built into a different system?
Well, so 2 things. I do think that this is likely. Could you play additional games using the Hellfinder rules after you complete the kind of main story. Good. Could you experience that first bit again? No. It's going to be a one-time thing. Once you're done, you'll be like, well, I know how that. And I'm excited to take people on that journey. I think that my biggest challenge there is just making sure everybody's on board for what it's going to contain. There will be a extensive discussion about topics and themes without spoiling anything to make sure that folks know what they're on board for. I don't want to be, but it is a horror game.
Yeah.
So there's that. Why did I build my own system? Well, because I need some things that Pathfinder doesn't do. So I'll give you one example because this is mentioned on the page right now.
Mm-hmm.
The game will include both a stress system and a trauma system. So when bad things happen to you, when you see things you shouldn't see and maybe can't unsee, you can take stress. And stress is kind of like a mental counterbalance to your hit points. It doesn't quite work the same way. You can relieve stress a lot easier, but in the moment, stress is really hard to get rid of.
Right.
So in a situation, you might find that your stress ratchets, and there comes a point in time where you've taken too much stress that you can take trauma from that. And trauma can be, you develop an aversion to something, or you panic, or, something bad happens to your character. You in some way lose control or agency because you've cracked under the stress. There are some parallels here to how sanity works, but I don't like how sanity is implying that your mind is slipping away. I think people deal with stress, and some people are better at dealing with stress than others. And, I think it's a more accurate representation of when people are afraid. It's all about how stressed out they are about the thing. And when they cross a red line, they got to get out of there. Can't deal with it. Put me in front of a big enough spider and you will see me go pretty quickly. But trauma can also be physical. That is another aspect of this where I'm trying to step away from the heroic aspect of Pathfinder. Because again, this is going to be set in modern times. It's going to be a few years in the future. Not right now, it's a few years. You don't have instantaneous healing. Wounds can leave you with lasting effect. Like, I want to be able to introduce, hey, yeah, you took a critical hit. That means you're going to take a physical trauma. And you might get a sprained limb. You might get a broken bone. You might get a terrible bruise. You might get all sorts of things that are a problem. Mm-hmm. That you can heal over time. The same thing with, your mental traumas. You can heal those over time as well. You can overcome those. You can work on them. Right. But some of these things linger, and they will affect you. And because I'm also controlling the story, I can make sure that those things have impact.
Yeah, that's very cool. We used to play first edition Pathfinder. Two of the campaigns I run were very horror based, very Call of Cthulhu, very deep dark ones and outer realms. And so I hacked a system that has similarities to that. And I used a lot of it to build lore hooks and story hooks and narrative hooks. Is the trauma didn't have as much game mechanical implications as it did later story implications. So I'm excited to see what you do with this. I'm on board. It sounds cool.
Hellfinder is also going to redo the character generation and advancement system. In Hellfinder, it's kind of pretty much feat based. You kind of go up a level after each session. Mm-hmm. And then after 5 sessions, you're done playing. You're meant to only tell a story this long and hope.
That's cool.
Because it's a survival game. By the end of it, you should be as good as you're going to get, but also running low on everything and desperate for survival.
Yeah.
Hellfinder doesn't quite work that way. It's not as necessarily short form in its narrative. I'm going to be providing some of the story beats, but I'm going to leave the GM to determine other story beats within a certain framework. But advancement is going to be character creation and advancement as more of a point by where you can buy skill increases, attack increases, save increases, new feats, stuff like that. And once you've spent X amount of points, you go up a level for the numerical stuff. But otherwise, you want to be all feats, you can be all feats. That's fine. Just don't ever want to increase your dex. Okay. Build the character you want.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Nothing. That's so cool. So cool. I'm excited. We've so wandered off topic, but I love it. It's great.
No, it's a little bit self-promotional. I realize that, but I
love it.
I'm excited about it. It's the thing I'm currently working on right now. I've got some other freelance and other stuff I'm doing too. Right, I'm a little bit that making all these board games and working on Pathfinder Quest and doing some other stuff.
Busy guy.
Busy time.
Well, I'm gonna start pushing you out the door then because you sound so busy. So I'm gonna move us closer to the end. But I have a question. I have a question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, no matter what you do for a living, what part of the industries you're in. That question is, in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of obviously story and game, but also comic books and improv acting and all these other things where people can just hang out and get along. There's a shared communal language. If you agree with me, and not everybody does agree with this little theory of mine, but if you do, what is the magical thread that holds it all together?
I think I agree. I think at its heart, everybody in the kind of core of who they are wants to be part of a story, and we're all the protagonists of our own, right? I mean, I think that for good or ill, our world has made that very manifest. And it comes from who we are, what we are, right? The way we evolved into who we are is this desire to be part of a group, to be part of a story, to be part of a narrative. And when you sit down and play games with people for just a little bit, you don't have to worry about paying your mortgage and, going to the doctor next week, or your fear of flying, or any of the other things that give us grief or stress. And just for a little bit, you get to set all that aside and play make believe. And with that group of people, you get to invest yourself in a story that doesn't have any other stake than your own enjoyment. And that's a rare thing. I think most of us spend most of our lives, working to live. And this is the live. This is one way you can do that, right? You can go on trips and stuff, and those come with all sorts of stress. You know what doesn't come with stress? I mean, other than scheduling. Sitting down with a bunch of your friends and just a little story. And laughing, enjoying it, telling something that has meaning, walking away from it going, I'm never going to forget that. And it's something you and the people at that table get to share. It's your own, you've built your own language, your own story, your own narrative. You've made that. You made that thing. And it's special. And I think that it's, and you get this even with, remember that time we all played Risk and you managed to win from Australia? You're still creating a narrative there. There's a story. There's a fiction there. There's a world there. There's a shared experience that I think everybody finds. At least I know that I have along. That when I sit down and think about, the special moments of my life, there's plenty of things. There's graduations and first kisses and all sorts of things. But there's my first Gen Con. There was the conclusion to, one amazing, vampire camp. There was one LARP I went to where everybody was dressed up and it was pure insanity. There was conclusions to 5-year-long campaigns. There were moments that will stick out, even though the entire rest of the campaign is right. One fight that was just mad, right? And all those things are part of my journey and my story, and I'm excited to have more of them, right? Because it is a place where I can get away from all that math I have to do to make board games.
That's the good math, though. Yeah, that's a really good answer. I love that answer. That's fantastic. Do you got time for some quick fire questions just to get to know Jason a little better?
I mean, yeah.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I usually have a pretty good stack of books. I think there's a handful of role-playing games I'm working my way through. I recently picked up the Transformers role-playing game. I grew up a Transformers kid, so I'm reading my way through that. Me and my friends are playing. We're playing Cyberpunk and Marvel's multiverse role-playing game, both kind of on-off time schedule. So I'm making sure to keep current on those. Book-wise, I usually have a stack. Right now, I'm finishing up Parable of the Stower, which seems oddly prescient, unfortunately, in our current times. And I also, not immune to reading ridiculous things. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I'm reading one of the older Star Trek novels called The Eugenics War, that involves the early story of Khan, and I have mixed thoughts on it. It's based entirely upon the Gary Seven character from the TOS show, which was meant to be a spin-off, like weird modern day Star Trek kind of show with Gary Seven and his cat. It was a very strange episode, and there's no surprise why it didn't get made to a thing. But it did come back in this book in a way that is weird and disconcerting. So, sometimes I read whatever, I've got a mountain of books. Daniel Abraham's book. He was one of the co-authors who wrote The Expanse. I've got that in my pile. So, lots of stuff.
Cool. What are you playing right now?
What am I playing right now? Well, I mentioned we were playing Marvel Multiverse, and we've been playing Cyberpunk Red. Video game wise, I've been engrossed with trying to work my way through Baldur's Gate 3. Love the narrative there, but I keep tripping over 5th edition mechanics. I've also been playing a game called 7 Days to Die, which is a zombie survival crafter game that I've been playing for years now. They finally went into their 1.0 release, so playing that. I've got to play through a Fallout 4 I'm trying to get back to now and again. Board game wise, I just tried out Sky Team, the game that won Spiel des Jahres. It is a brilliantly done 2-player co-op game where you are pilot and co-pilot, and you're trying to land the plane. It is very clever and it is very good tactile. The board looks like the control panel between the two pilots, and you have to move pieces around and adjust dials and knobs and place dice to do things. Very cool. That's about it.
You mentioned 7 Days to Die, and anybody who knows me knows that survival crafting games are my jam. So I'm curious, have you tried some of the other ones? Or do you play Rust or Conan Exiles or
I tried
Enshrouded?
I tried Conan for a little bit. I've played Enshrouded a couple times. I played Ark for a while. I thought Ark was kind of fun, but was a bit much for my PC at the time, so I haven't gone back to it. I have a pretty good PC, but man, Ark is
it's a beast.
I've tried a handful of them. We played Grounded for a bit, which was pretty fun.
Yeah.
But I don't like spiders, and they keep flipping me in that game. So, Did I literally panic? And I'm on stream doing this, so I'm like, do, and then I turn around and there's a spider, and all of a sudden I'm like, and then it kills me because I'm too busy panicking. So
the spiders in that game move creepy too. Like those are really creepy spiders.
Yeah. Oh, and they go fast too. They're not slow. When they realize that they've got a meal, they're coming after you.
Yep.
It's no good. I don't like it.
Okay, tough question.
Sure.
if your essence was boiled down and injected into a game, digital, tabletop board game, whatever, what game would it be, what world, and what race and class?
Oh, God.
This is the last one. Last one.
I mean, you know, I mean, when you make games for a living, it's hard enough to pick your own. So I'm not going to do that because frankly, that has my essence and DNA kind of all over it, right? You know, it has my fingerprints all over it. I'm going to pick a different game. All right. Yeah, I'll go with that. So, back in college, me and some friends picked up a game, role-playing game, called Battlelords of the 23rd Century. Ever heard of it?
No, I have not heard of that one.
It was a game in the came out in the late 80s, 90s. It went fallow for a little bit, and then like maybe 5-6 years ago, some folks picked it up and did a second edition, and they put out new books for it, so it's still available. The original books haven't always aged well. You know, they're product of the 80s, so there's some things in there that I'm like, okay, come on. Yeah. But I think the thing that impressed me about the game, that for me made me really fall in love with it, was fantasy has a very shared zeitgeist. You say elf, everybody knows what an elf. Say dwarf, everybody knows what a dwarf is. As a result, everybody at the table can have a shared experience really easy. There's lots of kind of ways to bootstrap into fantasy that are like, oh, they're dwarves, but they're different in this one way. Or, you know, and as a result, everybody can get going really quick. Sci-fi has a much harder lift on it because most of the things that we think about sci-fi are not public domain. So they can't all be put in together. You can't be like, oh, this is a Jedi and this is a Klingon and this is the Doctor Who character, right? You can't blend all those things together because they're all trademarked and protected, at least for the next 40 to 50 years. So we don't have that sort of shared mind space that everybody can talk about. Battlelords got around this by basically identifying all of those and then making some race, some alien species that was basically that. So there are Klingons called Iridani, and they are basically Klingon. And is it perfect? And sometimes is it really kind of cheesy and over the top? Yes. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was like, this is what I want. And the game is ridiculous. It comes with the original one and a book called Lock and Load that was like this thick, that was just nothing but guns. It was an entire book of guns and stats for guns and like 50 different types of guns and then 30 different types of guns within that, tons of equipment, tons of armor. It kind of tried to do the kitchen sink approach for sci-fi. It's like there's Greys, there's Orions, there's Klingons, there's dudes that look like the Predator. You know, but they have tentacles for arms, so they're different and they eat humans. So if I had to pick something, I would pick Battlelords of the 23rd Century. That's cool. And I would probably be an Iridani sword saint with my plasma sword cutting my way into the future. That would be me.
Very cool. Good answer. All right, well, we're heading out the door here. I like to open up a little space for you to talk about what you're working on or what's coming out that you can boost. You've mentioned a lot of the stuff going on, but here's a little window. Hit me with it.
Sure. Right now, if you're interested in picking up things from me, Elemental Stones is available now. You can find it at Paizo.com or at some retailers, and if they don't have it, bug them to go get it. In addition to that, we've got Pathfinder Quest, which will be launching on BackerKit in spring of 2025. You can go sign up for that project now, and if you sign up and back it, we'll throw in a free coin to use in the game, metal coin, as a pre-launch bonus. In addition to that, I have Hellfinder coming. This is from Minotaur Games, not Paizo. And Hellfinder will be launching on November 5th at 15:25 specific Central Time. No particular reason, just that. Silly.
I can't wait.
What else I got going on? I have an adventure path coming out for the Pathfinder Adventure Path line. I wrote Volume 1 of the Spore War Adventure Path. I believe that comes out in January of 2025. And beyond that, every single thing I'm working on is so far out, I cannot talk about it. But if you're interested in picking up Hellfinder, you can find that on Drive-Thru RPG right now. I have some other stuff on there. Minotaur Games is kind of my private imprint where I do whatever I feel like doing. I have a party game called Elephant in the Room that you can get print on demand. Got a world setting that I'm supporting through Patreon called Eventide that I'm building my own world for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The first adventure for that is also up on DriveThruRPG. I'm just busy. That's what I got right now. We'll stick with it. That's plenty.
There will be links down below, all of this stuff. Go check out Jason's stuff. All right, I'm going to close up shop here. It's time to close down the tavern. As you head out into the cold, I'm going to give you the chance to have the final word. Any parting words of wisdom?
I will say this. This world is a tough place, and sometimes it can be very grim, and the future doesn't always seem certain. But one thing is certain, and that is that you can always break out some dice. Then with some friends and have a good. So do that.
Seems a mischievous goblin has stolen my last bottle of the finest ale, so I'm going to close up shop and track his ass down. But before we go, thank you to Jason Bulmahn for sitting down and sharing your insights into the intriguing world of narrative game design across different formats. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, remember to keep exploring, creating, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.